I'm James Lynch, and this is a special edition of the Stock Report as I take a look back at 2024 and talk about the biggest winners and losers in the UFC, whose stock went up the most and whose stock dropped. And in this case, because it's a special video, the thumbnail does not give it away. So we're going to start with my biggest stock riser this year, and I don't think this is up for debate. The biggest stock riser for me in this past year was Ilia Topuria. Think about the fact that Topuria was not the champion this time last year, and here he is, now the champ. He's got 2 huge wins, defeated Alex Volkanovski, knocked him out. First fighter to knock out Max Holloway in the UFC. Had the whole thing with Real Madrid. I mean, if you've seen my Fighter of the Year video, it pretty much explains all this already. But Ilia Topuria, for me, his stock got to, close to Conor McGregor levels this year in terms of what he's been able to do. To me, there's nobody's stock who went up higher than Ilia Topuria. He is the number one stock riser, no questions asked. We can debate this in the comments, of course, if you guys would like. Second biggest stock riser is another guy that had a great year, and that is Alex Pereira. He just took it to another level, being Mr. Reliable. The UFC calls him for a main event. No problem. He fought 3 times this past year, and, all finishes, right? Jamal, Yuri, Khalil Roundtree, all finishes. Very impressive. And you just see the level of, stardom that he got up to this year as well. You see the fan support. Pereira is by far the biggest Brazilian star in the UFC right now. He really made a name for himself. I know last year, obviously, winning the title was big, but this year especially, being able to defend his title 3 times. If there's no Ilia Topuria this year, Alex Pereira is the fighter of the year. No questions asked. I gave the edge to Topuria, though, just because of the opposition he fought. I mean, beating Volk and Max is far more impressive than the 3 fighters that he defeated this year, in my opinion. So that's why Pereira, and then even in this video, that's why Pereira is number 2 on this list. Okay, number 3, and again, keep in mind, we're going mainly with notable names in the UFC as far as the stock report, because when I think of stock report, I think of, notable fighters. I'm not talking about newcomers. And this is another one that I don't think he gets enough love, and that is Dricus du Plessis, the middleweight champion. So again, keep in mind that last year, du Plessis was not the middleweight champion. He beat Sean Strickland in Toronto at UFC 297. And then, that probably wouldn't have got him, high on the stock report by any means. But it's the fact that the fight after that, he follows that up and becomes the first fighter to submit Israel Adesanya in the UFC. Super impressive fight. It wasn't pretty, but it was certainly very interesting to see what he was able to do in that fight. And this sets up a very good 2025 for du Plessis. And he also is another guy that you just see the fan support and people who are really into what he's up to. Just very, very big year for du Plessis. Again, only the 2 fights, but like I said, he won the title over Strickland, and then he finishes Adesanya. That was very impressive as far as what he was able to do. We'll see if he can continue that against Strickland in the rematch. But du Plessis' stock went up big time. It's definitely established himself as one of the big name fighters in the UFC. Okay, those are my top 3. Now, I got a bunch of honorable mentions because I know there's going to be people in the comments going, how did you miss this person? So we got a lot of honorable mentions. Let's go first with a fighter that only competed once this year, but it was a huge win, and that was Khamzat Chimaev. Submitting Robert Whittaker, getting that ranked win that a lot of people were wanting to see, doing it in the first round. First fighters to submit Robert Whittaker. Chimaev's lined up for a title shot fighting the winner of DDP and Strickland. I don't think there's any questions asked there. Chimaev's stock went up big time when his stock was a bit down, if you think about it, from missing out on certain fights and illnesses and all this different stuff. His stock is right back to the top. A lot of people are expecting him to win the belt next year. If you look at sort of fan reaction and all that, Chimaev definitely deserves an honorable mention. Another guy who deserves an honorable mention, huge stock rise this year for him, Diego Lopez. 3 fights this year, I think? Yeah. 3 fights this year, including the fight against Dan Ige on a couple hours notice. You got to give him credit for that. And then defeating Brian Ortega, very good win for him. He is set up nicely in the contender spot at 145. Diego Lopez has to get a shutout here as well. Another guy who didn't compete a ton this year, but deserves a lot of credit, and that is Umar Nurmagomedov. Huge win over Corey Sandhagen. That's what's earned him the title shot against Merab Dvalishvili. He also fought Bezket in a fight that was a bit risky if you think about it, because he fought an opponent who was very tough and didn't have a lot of name recognition, and Umar got it done in that one. And then obviously the Sandhagen fight was very impressive. So Umar had a great year too. Can't discount him at all. And then another guy who's very active this year, and people are calling a future champion. I'm not there yet, but Carlos Prats, huge year for him. 4 fights this year and all finishes. Right? Giles, Radke, Lee, and Magny. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that as far as Prats, and just a interesting character out of that Fighting Nerds gym. Carlos Prats' stock went up big time, considering he had just come into the UFC this year off Contender Series. And then finally, last but not least, another honorable mention has to go to Renato Moicano. This guy had a phenomenal year. Getting wins over Jalen Turner. Sorry, I forgot the Dober fight, actually. He had the Dober fight, which was good. beats Jalen Turner, and then beats Benoit Saint-Denis. Huge win where he was an underdog in that one, which has now set him up for the Beneil Dariush fight. Renato Moicano's stock went up big time, and he now becomes a player at 155 pounds with a couple of the victories that he's had there. Okay, let's get to the biggest stock droppers. And again, the thumbnail did not give it away on this one. People might disagree with me on this one, but I mean, he didn't fight this year, and yeah, it's Conor McGregor. There's no question Conor McGregor's stock went down this year. He didn't fight. He had more headlines about things that happened outside the cage and all this bad publicity and everything else. And yeah, I mean, I know Conor will always be Conor. People will either, watch and tune in to see him fight or see him, not do so well. Conor's the biggest name in MMA. There's no question about that. But I do think his stock took a hit with him not fighting, and the fact that, the biggest story this year was the whole, allegations that happened outside the cage. So to me, McGregor took a huge hit this year. He's 36. He has not fought now since 2021. So we're kind of getting into that Stipe Miocic territory of not fighting, or Dominic Cruz. And, he's supposed to fight at UFC 303 and it didn't happen. And then he didn't even rebook the fight. So Conor McGregor, just based off name value and the fact that he didn't compete, his stock definitely goes down with the fact he didn't compete this year. So McGregor's my number one. Okay, my number two, he is on the thumbnail. I talked about him a bit in my disappointing divisions video. But yeah, it has to be Colby. Again, because the Ian Gary fights didn't happen. Colby only fought once. It was a fight that he ended up not seeing past the second round. Listen, I don't think I'm alone in saying this, that Colby at one point, I mean, he didn't have a ton of stock going into this year, but he had the opportunity to raise his stock if he was able to fight Gary or able to get a win or something. But instead, we wait all the way until this short notice fight against Buckley, and then he ends up losing, and it's like, his stock has taken a big hit. Now people are calling for a retirement. So Covington's stock took a huge hit. So you got to put Covington on this list. And then finally, someone that only fought once this year, but you just see the way the fans are reacting to him. And again, I don't agree with the fan backlash towards him, but it's Jamal Hill. Again, I have a video coming out, or I don't know if it'll be out before this, but most hated fighters. Jamal Hill is the most hated fighter in the UFC right now, based off how the fans perceive him. And again, I don't agree with it, but Hill's stock took a huge hit for the fact that fans have now turned on him. He loses this fight to Pereira, and he wasn't able to fight after that. Remember, he got the injury. He was supposed to fight Cleo Roundtree and then Carlos Ulberg. Now he's going to be fighting Yuri Prohaska, first pay-per-view of the year. What a way to raise his stock if he can go in there and defeat Yuri Prohaska. But Jamal Hill's stock took a big hit considering, again, I think people expected the Pereira fight to go on a little bit longer, and it didn't. So Jamal Hill's stock took a big hit. Another fighter whose stock took a hit this year, you got to bring it up, and it's got to be Israel Adesanya. And look, he had a good fight against DDP, but the fact of the matter is he has now lost 3 of his last 4 fights. He was submitted for the first time in his career in the UFC, and he's now lost back-to-back title fights. Like, where does Izzy go from here at 35, right? Obviously, he's going to fight Imavov, but it was a tough year for Izzy because he just fought the one time and it was a stoppage loss. So Izzy's stock took a big hit. And again, keep in mind, I'm going with like notable names in the UFC that whether they won or lost this past year. And last but not least, someone that I've talked about in other videos, Benoit Saint-Denis. This was a guy that people felt like was, I heard future champion. I heard so many different things about Benoit Saint-Denis, but this year, not so great for him. Back-to-back losses, Poirier, Moicano, both stoppage losses too. The Poirier fight, we could talk about the staff and the fact that he looked good in the first round, but the second fight against Moicano, that was just such a disappointing fight where it was not competitive, and then it ends in a stoppage in the second round. So Saint-Denis, still only 28 years old, but huge stock drop for him. I don't think there's any questions asked there. So that gets some honorable mentions as far as these next two, people. And so Benoit Saint-Denis, Israel Adesanya get an honorable mention in this video as well. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Whose stock? Give me your 3 stock risers for this year that their stock went up, and then give me 3 stock droppers. Again, there could be a lot of options here. I mainly went with like notable names. Like obviously, if you look at names like, there's so many out there. I even mentioned like a Carlos Prats, but like, there's a number of fighters out there who didn't really have a lot of fanfare or notoriety, and then they certainly raised their stocks this year. So this will be a fun debate on this one, because again, there's a lot more of a sample size we could go through on this one to look at whose stock went up and went down. But just let me know your top 3, bottom 3. We can have a fun discussion about it. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. My name is James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.